You know, the shooting tragedies that have happened over this course of the week can really leave a person wondering if there's any more respect when it comes to the quality of life for people. These shooting occurrences seem anymore that they're not about someone getting vengeance. It's almost as if someone has this element of entitlement that they tear away at the human fabric of life. Now, I'm sure any words of condolence or reflection cannot fully capture what we need as a nation today amidst the minutiae of racism or classism or every other type of ism that perpetuates our defenses because we make those knee-jerk reactions from our emotions rather than on reason and experience when our beliefs are called into question. A couple years ago, the president of a college in Jefferson City called Carson Newman University, the President Randall O'Brien, was reflecting in a conversation with a friend of his. Together they were lamenting over the inequality of justice and racism within the United States. And O'Brien writes that his friend asked this really kind of offhanded question at that point and said, if someone offered you $20 million to become black, would you do it? O'Brien reflected upon that. He said it was like a sledgehammer hitting a fly. So when O'Brien took this a little bit further and he decided to write about this incident on Facebook, you could imagine all the bells and the whistles and the alarms went off. People went off wondering what his motivation was and why he would even ponder this question in the first place. But at the conclusion of his thoughts and in his article where this comes from, he believed that we need to hold some credibility or reform. We've heard these before. He says it's time to hold reform to the various systems of criminal justice, education, and then the church. That each has a responsibility of looking beyond the injustices of racism and looking up toward the elements of liberty. Now, I think there's more to this $20 million question that asks if you would be black, would you do it? For the matter of that, if someone were to offer you $20 million to become white, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become Asian, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become Latino, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to be gay, would you become gay? If someone offered you $20 million to be lesbian, would you become lesbian? If someone offered you $20 million to be straight, would you become straight? If someone offered you $20 million to become immigrant, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become a terminal cancer patient, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become disabled to some extent, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become female or male, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to choose to be deaf or blind, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become a police officer or a first responder, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become a part of the military, would you do it? If someone offered you $20 million to become the President of the United States, would you do it? If somebody offered you $20 million to become the pastor of your church, would you do it? Yeah. Yes? No? Maybe so? Heck no! You see, the situation when it comes to this $20 million question, it doesn't take into account that we are what we already are. And that conceiving becomes something else that we're not, that would be something out of the question. We're happy for the most part for who we are, or we've come to adapt to the situations as life might throw something at us, whether it be an illness or something that's inflicted beyond our control. You see, the dilemma is that because we are who we are, it fully prevents us from understanding the world through the eyes of somebody else. This is because we're not somebody else, and that hinders us from fully really understanding what their experiences is, or from embracing another person, because in most cases, we just don't get it. And that becomes our handicap. You see, we cripple others and we cripple ourselves when we attempt to define life of another person through our own set of lenses and experiences. So is there any hope for our world? Is there any hope for our neighborhoods? Yes. By what creed do we share a common ground with all people that don't put aside our differences or our similarities, but embraces the uniquenesses of our character? Now, this is not to cloud over that very notion of today's matters by just saying, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. We know this, we believe this, we talk this, but do we truly and fully walk it? Do we put action to our words? Consider these words that are written by an online blogger. Instead of saying, all lives matter, Jesus said, Samaritan lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus said, children's lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus said, Gentile lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus said, Jewish lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus said, women's lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus said, lepers' lives matter. And this blogger continues, even though Jesus loved everyone, even to the point of going to the cross to forgive their sins, Jesus went out of his way to intentionally help specific groups of people, the alienated, the mistreated, and those facing injustice. And he concludes, and this is what makes sense to me. So saying Black Lives Matter is one of the most Christ-like things we can do. Now, I've been compassionately asked on the side by people, a couple people, about my advocacy for the LGBTQ community. The conversation goes something like this. I get what you have to say, David, and I support you, but can't we just move on because we're already there? Are we? Are we already there? I believe we're on our way, but I don't believe we're just quite there yet. You see, when we continue to say, I'm okay with this and with that, we start to silence a voice with our own voice of exclusivity and hinder a multitude of voices speaking out and being heard too. The majority voice will always suppress the minority voice because one is not able to be as what is perceived as the norm. You know, for example, my wife and I partook in communion last week. We rarely ever get to do this because I'm doing what I'm doing and Rebecca's singing in the choir. So we came down, we partook in communion to celebrate the gift of God's love in Jesus Christ by receiving bread and cup, and then we kissed each other. And then we went back to our seats. Nobody said anything, as they shouldn't say anything. But I wonder, and this is just all about me, I wonder if Rebecca were my husband and I gave her a kiss here at this place, if there would be still as much a celebration as it's intended to be. I believe we'll be getting there when such expressions are the norm in our community. The Pledge of Allegiance provides us with a national creed that proclaims with liberty and justice. Next week, we'll finish this series by adding really the understanding of who the recipients are of this liberty and justice. But today, our creed is that the liberty we experience individually is the justice that brings the unheard voices to the surface to be heard. As the prophet Zechariah spoke to an exclusive people of his day, render true judgments. Render true judgments. Show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, the alien, the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. When we say such phrases like, I'm good with it, or I get it, we make our voice overpower the voices of the weak, rather than being a voice for the weak by handing ourselves over to the hands of the strength of others. The words of Zechariah aren't some sort of pipe dream for the disenfranchised. Rather, it's an exclamation of God's character for the purpose of a community for God's creation. The justice of our liberty is a creed that includes a mutuality of each other despite, not in spite, our uniquenesses. Together, when we discover who we are whole, it's because of our liberty that it's not about our wholeness, but it's about the justice of all. Our liberty. Our liberty comes from the justice of accepting the other whom we see within ourselves or is devoid of ourselves, and we claim also as our own. I want to show you a video clip. The following clip doesn't provide us with any entire answer to understanding the uniquenesses of the others, but it starts to maybe help us find how we can begin accepting the uniquenesses within ourselves.